And we're live, but we'll give it a little chance to count up here so we don't cut off open for the show. Hey everybody, how you doing? Happy Monday. May the 4th be with you. Read about Kent State. May 4th also means Kent State. 4 dead in Ohio, but not here. Who is the one rookie you cannot leave your rookie draft without? That more this week on the couch. Scott, Barrett, fantasy points. Who's the one rookie you cannot leave your rookie draft without?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm heartbroken every time I leave a draft without Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but that's almost all of them.
Sure.
So the guy you can grab, I will say Michael Pittman. Just our guy at our new site, Greg Cassell, compared him to Michael Thomas. Absolutely loves him. You know who also absolutely loves him? Head coach Frank Reich, who in that video he put out where you could follow Indianapolis with the during the draft, he said he thought Pittman might be the best wide receiver in this class. It's just an ideal landing spot. There's not much competition there. T.Y. Hilton, what is he? Is he like 31 now or 32 years old? And the way they talked about this guy, it was the GM, Chris Ballard, it was the owner, it was the head coach. They all said that they think he could be a true dominant wide receiver one in the NFL. They want him to play the X. And I actually dug even deeper, and I got the area scout who first pointed the GM and the head coach to Pittman. And he said he was there at his college watching his practices, and he was like, I know this sounds crazy, but I swear it's true. I went to a bunch of practices and I never saw him lose a one-on-one rep in practice. I went to the Senior Bowl, didn't see him lose a one-on-one rep in practice. This guy I think could be dominant in the NFL, and I think this guy could be dominant in the NFL.
I'm glad you mentioned Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I did have a terrible in our football guy staff dynasty. I was bad enough that I got the 101. And I didn't have to even pause or think about it. I mean, I think that's the underlying thing that we would both stand together in unison and say to folks, 101, I think even in a 0.5 PPR, and a non-PPR, for those of you that are still doing those, I may be a little bit more involved. In a typical 1 point PPR, it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. You don't even think about it. I mean, the alignment here is spectacular. Ted Nguyen from The Athletic did an excellent piece that came out this morning on the 10 best fits in the draft, and you actually hit on 2 of them, Edwards-Helaire and Pittman. And I think drawing attention to Pittman is good. And what's real interesting here, Scott, we are supposed to be in the business of giving people actionable advice. And again, if you didn't hear Scott mention it, fantasy points, Greg Cassell was there, who's just like a legend. I mean, Greg Cassell's one of the minds that has created this erudite, studied football world, looking deeper, that we all like to be in. And lots of other, Grant Barfield, lots of other people, of course, to check out there at Fantasy Points. And you did an excellent series breaking down the press conferences and just looking at key quotes. And I also loved I'm an armchair psychoanalyst. I mean, we're on the couch with Sigmund. Michael Pittman, though, you can see that the Colts, they had a higher priority than Jonathan Taylor. They thought if we only can come out of this draft with one of Pittman or Taylor, then first we want Pittman. And on the subject of actionable advice, there's that fat second tier of wide receivers in rookie drafts. I think that Justin Jefferson has probably separated himself. I think that Henry Ruggs, just because of draft capital, is in that top 4, top 5. I mean, whether he's in your top 4 or top 5. But then it's like Rager and Chenault and Pittman and Higgins and Ayuk, And there's all kinds of different ways you can sort these guys out. And before the draft, I think part of how you sorted it out with Pittman, I did have Pittman at the top of that group, except for Mims. Mims also is in that group. I have a crush on Mims. But Pittman is so skilled, and that's going to be more important for this year because of that lack of a ramp up. And then when you see the fit like Ted Nguyen laid out and how the Colts are so excited. So let's say Pittman is your top receiver of that second tier. Actionable advice. If someone says, okay, well, Pittman just went right in front. I'm sitting at 111, Pittman just went right in front of me. Who would be your second choice out of that big second tier that makes this wide receiver group so special?
Yeah, so I got Brandon Ayuk in the 3rd round of a super flex rookie. Yeah, he's another guy I love. I've been looking at Dynasty a little bit different lately, where we think like a landing spot, like N'Keal Harry to the Patriots. I think you were talking about this. It's like it looks like a great landing spot on paper. Not a lot of target volume, and then it's like the worst spot to be in, and he disappoints, and it's a bad prospect. I'm looking at it a little differently, where immediate target volume doesn't matter as much to me as something like, let's say, regime certainty and regime uncertainty. Let's look at Denzel Mims, who we both love. Let's look at Laviska Shenault. So those are both pretty raw prospects coming out, raw route runners, needed some time to develop, but big ceiling. Clearly, I think both of those guys landed in bad landing spots. Like the short-term immediate target competition isn't too detrimental, but I think these are 2 lame duck head coaches who are going to be, on the couch or on a different team next year. So you're going to have a new guy come in who isn't that invested in this player. That's half of the equation to draft capital. These guys have an investment. They want these players to succeed. Maybe a guy comes in, doesn't really get Laviska Shenault, how to use him, doesn't want to manufacture touches for him, doesn't fit the scheme. And then that's just like a really poor landing spot. So I think quality of coaches, and also especially now amidst the coronavirus, where less practice time, I think that's going to matter a lot. So those 2 guys, not a great landing spot to me.
I think that's really fair. I think that's something that we don't weight enough when we think about these things in dynasty leagues. And bringing up Jacksonville is perfect because it's just the idea of the regime that drafted the player. You want to still be the regime 3 or 4 years from now, or else like you said, they have no personal investment to keep giving them chances and keep trying to create the perfect role for them to show how smart they were to take them. But also, just a different regime is going to come in and maybe have different plans for that player and see them differently. So I think you're absolutely right to point that out and hold it in contrast to guys like Rager and Higgins. I mean, look, you're going to see at least like 3 years of the Burrow, Taylor, Brian Callahan offense. I mean, we're going to see what kind of fruit it can bear. And by the way, Burrow was one of Ted, and Ted's fantastic, one of the best film breakdown people in the biz. Burrow was also one of his top 10 fits. And he wasn't just staying in the early picks either. He had Meek Robertson and some other players. So Burrow's going to get a chance to flourish in an offense that should be well suited for his talents. And T. Higgins is obviously ticketed to be one of the top receivers. And I think you're right, too, to downplay the importance of first-year targets or first-year opportunities, something that people should think about with running backs, too. Press conferences. I loved the series that you did at the press conferences, Scott. And folks, if you haven't got your free account for Fantasy Points, sign up just for that, just so you can read that. What else? Well, first on the personal side, because I like that you're also paying attention not just to the words, like your computer transcripts and what did they say, but you're actually watching them for their moods, their body language, even sometimes how they're playing off of each other. Give me a takeaway or two on the human side, maybe how your opinion of a coach changed or was enhanced because you really put the jeweler's eye on when you were watching these press conferences.
Yeah, so that was one of the exciting aspects of it. So I'm not at PFF anymore. So these NFL teams aren't our clients, so I can really be honest about how I feel towards a certain GM or front office, and I didn't pull any punches here with certainly a few of the teams. We were just talking about Brandon Ayuk. I think Kyle Shanahan's a genius. So him in this offense, he said Ayuk was his number 1 receiver in the class. He almost took him at 13. Yeah, give me this guy in a Kyle Shanahan offense who loves him, knows how to use him. But doing this exercise, it really jumped out to me the differences between a well-run franchise, a poorly run franchise, a really smart head coach, and one who wasn't as smart. So let's say a guy who disappointed me, let's say Anthony Lynn. Just really blatantly obvious this guy was from the Rex Ryan coaching tree. I'll leave it at that. And I think this is going to be an important year where the differences between a good head coach and a bad head coach really materialize. Just the lack of practice time. How do you adjust to that? What do you do? And then they're coming in and running in a brand new offense. The offensive coordinator came in halfway through last season, but was disappointed he didn't get a chance to really run out his offense. That's what this offseason was going to be for. They're not going to have that time. That's a team I would bet the under on, a team I would bet the over on, and buy long term like a stock would be Cincinnati. Really, really, really impressed by not just the head coach, Zach Taylor there, but also the offensive coordinator. Just two guys who it was really clear they know what they were doing. They know they really get it. And I think they're going to be successful for a really long time. They're like, we're going to incorporate what Joe Burrow did well at LSU. We're going to incorporate a lot of that into our playbook. Like, that's great. Like, we want our guys to succeed. We're going to do what they do well. And two guys who just like really blew me away in their pressers.
Yeah, the Bengals. It's time to be looking forward to the future if you're a Bengals fan. Max D in the chat room also points out that 32 beat writers, excellent Twitter follow, is also doing some stuff on the pressers. And Josh Norris always does a tremendous series.
That's right.
Roto World. I think that Cincinnati, we should absolutely be optimistic. Let me just take your temperature since you mentioned Cincinnati and you mentioned what Joe Burrow did well at LSU. What about Joe Brady and Teddy Bridgewater and you add in Robbie Anderson? Are we sleeping on Carolina's offense? Is this going to be an offense that is exciting for fantasy football, even though, sure, the coronavirus offseason, et cetera, but they have a bit of a drop because of the experience that Brady and Bridgewater have together?
I think there's at least an outside chance. Robbie Anderson has some experience with the head coach as well. The player I'm most excited about, and I know this isn't a hot take by any stretch, but it's Christian McCaffrey. We have to remember that Clyde Edwards-Helaire in this offense caught the most receptions by an SEC running back in at least since the year 2000. And the only guys who came close were like Percy Harvin, who was, Randall Cobb, basically, wide receivers anyway. So like, what is Christian McCaffrey going to do in this offense? I'm just so excited. And then you also have to look at it. So let's pivot a little bit. Is Scott Turner, with the Washington Redskins, is he envisioning Gibson as this sort of McCaffrey-like running back? Because he loves, running backs who are like McCaffrey, where they can expose a defense. How are you going to adjust to this guy if we split him out wide? And they just, could it be? Probably not this year, but that's definitely in his range of outcomes, and upside wins championships. So that's a guy you're probably going to have to overpay on, even though his bust rate might be higher than a lot of the guys going around him.
Yeah, I continue to come back to Gibson and Devin Duvernay as players that I feel like I'm underrating. I put the Bloom 100. I try to put the Bloom 100 out on the Monday after the draft, because the post draft, because I want people to have something actionable for rookie drafts. But later on that day, I look at it and I want to change it. I also don't want people to think that I'm just totally erratic, and at any point you ask my opinion, it might change in 5 minutes. But we continue to, even some of the things you're uncovering, Scott, like data points from the press conferences, or just having a chance to think about it after the adrenaline has gotten out of our system from the draft. And Gibson, the thing that I keep coming back to with Gibson is they had one pick on the second day, and they used it on Gibson, and they didn't need him in any way. Gibson kind of reminds me of...
They had the most crowded... Sorry. They had the most crowded running back room by a landslide.
Right. They get Peyton Barber. They get J.D. McKissick. They bring back Peterson. They still have Darius Geis. They have Bryce Love, who I wonder if it's time for us to stop holding a candle for him, speaking of an explosive talent. Gibson reminds me of David Johnson in some ways, like Northern Iowa David Johnson.
I had the same take.
Yeah, and he's on a team that's going to have a will to figure out what he can do. Again, this idea that, and I sometimes maybe give the NFL too much credit when I say they kind of get it right. The draft isn't a crapshoot. Most of the best players go in the first round. As you go down the draft, like generally there's not much there in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round. But sometimes it's because teams want to show how smart they were to take players and keep giving them chances and come up with special plans for them. But yeah, Antonio Gibson is just a breathtaking player sometimes. And he's the kind of player that can force his way into touches, can force his way into the team plan. So that's absolutely an exciting player. Scott Turner, we shall see. I mean, there's some continuity there. That makes me worry, though. It's so funny, Scott. You say continuity and Scott Turner, and I think, oh no, they're going to start Kyle Allen week 1. You know, don't laugh.
Right.
I'm the one laughing, right? Because that's just that. And I, in general, and I'm going to, once things calm down, and we're doing a lot of stuff with football guys to open everything back up right now, I really want to do some sort of rankings or analysis through the lens of continuity. Like, continuity is going to be a multiplier or a magnifier multiplier, or it's going to make things, microscopic. At least early in the season, I think we're going to see this. And some of the teams with straight continuity across the board, like New Orleans comes to mind, Kansas City comes to mind. Those teams are really going to have the drop. And I think it was Jacob Rickroad that pointed out the 2011, the last year without an offseason, was a big-time passing year. It was Matthew Stafford's big breakout year. So a lot of stuff to think about. On an informational standpoint, Scott, not so much what you got from the coaches' personalities or how they express themselves, just from a pure informational standpoint, what stands out from the pressers as something that you want to think, oh, okay, well, I got to go back to the drawing board and incorporate that now?
Let's see. So Adam Troutman and Cole Kmet are both viewed as the inline Y tight ends, which I thought was weird for New Orleans because they basically traded the rest of their draft for this guy. They said they had him as a top 40 player in this draft, so they clearly liked him way more than the draft capital implies, and I think that's important. There's a lot of guys I can talk about like that, but just the Y in a Sean Payton offense. I mean, Jared Cook is not the Y. Colby Fleener was not the Y. Jimmy Graham was not the Y. And I'm just wondering how that would look in his offense because we haven't really seen it.
Adam Troutman's better than Cole Kmet, right?
I mean, I think so. I liked him a lot, but I also whiffed on Hunter Bryant badly.
It might have been the knee issues. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, Hunter Bryant, I think he was around number 40 or so in the pre-draft Bleem 100, and he looked like not quite as flexible and bendy. I think Jordan Reed was a comparison thrown out, and he's not a Jordan Reed type quite, but he can certainly be someone who's a mismatch for a linebacker trying to run up the field with him, and he's shown that he can create some big plays. Of course, he lands in Detroit, though. Well, that's not exactly exciting with T.J. Hawkinson. But yeah, I think that the knee might have been a bigger part of the picture than we thought. They gave him like $75,000 or something, like a pretty high amount. A lot of UDFAs got $100,000 plus this year. That's something to keep track of too in that second part of the draft. Okay, stepping back again, just big picture. Okay, Scott, big picture. Because one of the things now more than ever, Scott, we have a lot of time to hang out on social media and talk football. And part of that's talking football with all the people that we love. It's very stimulating. But part of that is we get an idea of the temperature of the room, If I say to you, what does fantasy football conventional wisdom have wrong, like the most wrong, the wrongest right now? What's something that you see that is basically a widely held belief that you're shaking your head and you're saying, nah, I don't think so. I think that this is a inefficiency that you can exploit in fantasy leagues right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them. I got trashed. I got dragged on Twitter yesterday for, commenting on Miles Sanders and questioning his.
You should talk to Jay Moyer.
Ranks.
Jay Moyer he's the guy that also keeps popping up to be like, Miles Sanders needs to be a lot better if he's going to be a feature back. Go ahead. Yeah,
so I mean, that's really interesting. I did know that PFF, trashed him in terms of grades last year, but I thought he looked okay. My issue is I don't think he has bell cow upside. I think Deuce Staley, Doug Peterson have made it abundantly clear they want a committee back. There were 3 different running backs on the team last year who went on IR. They signed Boston Scott off the street and still were giving him double-digit touches per game. And really, that's all I want for fantasy. We were just talking about Antonio Gibson. What makes him such an attractive, rookie draft pick is because he's a way better receiver than he is pure runner. And outside of the red zone, targets are worth 3.3 times as much as carries for fantasy running backs in PPR leagues. That's a big takeaway. The other one is what correlates best to fantasy production for a running back. It's not carries, it's not targets, it's not touches. Actually getting the ball, which you would think would, or it's not, and it's not even. Or maybe it is yards, but I don't think it's rushing yards or receiving yards, maybe total yards, but it's snaps. You need to be on the field. You want those running backs who are used in every facet of the game and do not come off the field. And I like Miles Sanders. I just question that he's going to get that sort of usage. I think it's likely they sign a veteran. They've been linked to veterans this offseason, and they were linked to J.K. Dobbins in the second round. So he's a guy I'm nervous about. Josh Jacobs, he said Lynn Bowden's going to be their joker running back. He looks to me like an upper middle class man's Jalen Richard. That is bad news for Josh Jacobs. Right. I want those bell cows. I see Kenyon Drake as a bell cow. I see Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a bell cow in the second half of the season. I think Austin Eckler could be a bell cow. And even if not, he smashed on 50% of the snaps last year. So those are guys I like more than Miles Sanders.
Yeah, and I think that you hit on one side of it with the idea that that's just not their design. And they're not going to invest it. They're not going to have a running back be that single running back be that foundational. And then Jay Moyer stuff, and he does a lot of great work over at Matt Wolf and RSP, is just that he's lacking the vision and efficiency to get the optimal results on bread and butter running plays, as like say Jordan Howard was doing last year, even though Howard's not going to add a lot with athleticism at the end of those runs. And I think you're absolutely right that it's at least 50-50 that they're going to bring in somebody like Carlos Hyde or Devontae Freeman or who knows. And they've already raised, I think Howie already raised the possibility of it. So you can't even say that you were blindsided by it. And look, if you're starting to dabble in early rankings, and I'm starting to roll them out little by little, and then again, once I put my first set of early rankings out, immediately I want to change a bunch of things about them. But at least it's an introduction to the questions you're going to be asking yourself. And Scott, we've got all these variables, right? Like, is Joe Mixon going to hold out? Like you said with Eckler,
right.
How big is his role going to be? Kenyon Drake, is they really going to commit to him like they were when he was winning championships for people? So I'm guessing it's going to be like from the late first, because running backs, guess what? Stud running back is back. Have you heard, Scott? It's like 10 out of the first 12 picks in some drafts are stud running back, right? Running back, running back, running back, running back, running back, running back. So even if you weren't planning on going running back in the first or second round, you're going to travel back in time with me to like 20 years ago, whenever running backs were 80% of the first two rounds. Even if you didn't want to go running back in the first or second round, it was the wrong move to do the upside down zero running back style draft, because the running backs would dry up so quickly that there'd really be nothing left for you. And then you'd be overpaying for whatever running back you took in the third or fourth round. And you wouldn't have that big of an advantage because wide receivers that were first or second round values were there in the third or fourth round. And you'd be like bashing yourself head against the desk. Like, how can I stop people from getting wide receivers that are as good as the ones I took in the first and second round when everyone's taking running backs? That's how the first round of drafts are going to be this year. And it also reflects the way that there was one true wide receiver one for fantasy last year, Michael Thomas. That's it. That's how it's going to be. And then the other thing that's going to sicken you is in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th round of drafts, if you're like, I got 3 great wide receivers in the first 4 rounds, I don't have to go wide receiver in the mid rounds, and you see the wide receivers people are getting in the mid rounds, and you aren't taking any, you're going to hate it. You're going to hate fantasy drafts if you're not taking wide receivers in the mid rounds, folks. So making running back decisions early is important. And even if you think, gosh, Kenyon Drake in the second round, that seems too rich. Well, these are some things you have to think about. And I think with Miles Sanders, we may be at a temporary peak, and we'll come back to that a little bit. Of course, he can be talented enough and take those steps to make it all not matter. But I like that. And I'm sorry that you got dragged, although I know that you're durable and you're not really going to care. Yeah. And look, I mean, hopefully people are still respectful on Twitter, but I love the sword and shield on Twitter because it's how I test my beliefs. Me and Mike Clay used to go round after round after round back in the day. And it's just a way finding people who are very well thought people who have the opposite opinion, opposite take, and probing and having them probe you, and even having people jump in from the peanut gallery is a way that you evolve your understanding of situations and really understand the whole range of outcomes. Because even though we give actionable advice, that's another layer to what we're supposed to do for people, is just give them an idea of a range of outcomes so you can start to react. Like in Tennessee's offense took that big left turn, and we know, like, well, hey, if you have an actual functional quarterback, now Derrick Henry can take off, and so can one of the receivers, and so on. Oh, wow. What else?
I just wanted to jump
Go
in
ahead.
real
Yeah,
quick.
please. Sorry, I go on and on. Good.
You're talking about a throwback to 20 years ago, fantasy that long ago. And that's exactly what I thought last season was. It was a throwback to my first season doing fantasy football. And in that time, it was an outlier. And then last year was an outlier where it's basically like snake drafts were broken. It was, however many years ago, you draft LaDainian Tomlinson 1 and
Right.
you win your league. Like that's how broken it was. Last year, you draft Christian McCaffrey 2 and you probably win your league. I have the stat in ESPN leagues, 48% of all McCaffrey teams advanced to their championship round. It was basically a coin flip. Is there any skill in drafting McCaffrey 2? It was no. It was Saquon Barkley goes 1, you draft McCaffrey 2. Meanwhile, Lamar Jackson, who, very savvy late round pick, only 40% of Lamar Jackson teams went to the championship round. So zero RB gets a lot right. And I'm mostly I'm kind of like a zero RB drafter, except those first 2 rounds, I'll target those uber bell cow backs who are on the field every snap, because those are the guys who win championships. And then after that, for sure, devalue running back for all the reasons, the great Sean Siegel laid out. But really the league winners are those, Christian McCaffrey type of running backs.
Yeah.
Ideally, or David Johnson, a few 2016, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the guys that are just those foundational pieces of the offense who also add value to their touches. Because Leonard Fournette was a foundational piece of his offense last year, but didn't really add value to his touches. And that's, by the way, circling back to your question about regime stability, the lack of regime stability and Tom Coughlin going bye-bye is why all of a sudden Leonard Fournette is persona non grata. They can't even trade. Well, they can't trade him because they're asking way too much. But, yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure how big a role Fournette is going to have in Jay Gruden's offense. I mean, if he's not going to be there next year, you start working in Reichel Armstead, a Divine Ozigbo. And we see what happens. It was a good question. I'm glad in the chat rooms. Thank you, everybody, for showing up this morning, by the way. Again, happy Monday. Matthew Bubar, friend of the show. What do we think about Keyshawn Vaughn? I'll let you go first because I have strong feelings about Keyshawn Vaughn.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear your feelings. In my prospect model, my pre-combine, pre-draft prospect model, it had him as the number 9 running back in the class. But if you threw out his first 2 seasons with Lovie Smith in Illinois, actually had him 4th. Like he was really dominant at Vanderbilt. If you consider the fact that he had the worst offensive line in the Power 5, the worst offense in the Power 5, the entire offense ran through him. And the thing that attracted me to him was he was versatile. He was used as a pass catcher. He was a strong pass blocker. And really that's what I got from the post-draft press conferences where Sean Licht, the GM, just over and over said the exact same thing. Like the only praise he gave on was the same thing over and over again. Yeah. And it's what matters most to me. It's what we were just talking about, which was he's capable of playing on all 3 downs. He's a guy that can play every down. He's a guy that could do everything. He could catch and he could run. It's the same quote over and over again, but that's what's important for fantasy is maybe they're looking for a bell cow, and that's, as fantasy drafters, exactly what we want. But he's still a guy I have a feeling is going to be overdrafted, but I'm eager to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, late first, early second is where you probably have to take him in a rookie draft to get him. So you have to forego one of those wide receivers, a Pittman or an Ayuk or someone like that. That's what's on the other side of the scale. That's not a difficult call for me. I mean, look, if you do take Keyshawn Vaughn and he is a 3-down running back this year and he does have 1,200, 1,400 total yards and double-digit touchdowns because Tom Brady spruces everything up in this offense. I mean, when I say spruces everything up, I just mean like limiting turnovers, sustaining drives, and so on. Then I'd say sell him right away. Sell him even during the season, unless he's an important part of a team that's making a run to a championship. Because to me, and I think that Tyler Johnson's another good example. Like the models, depending on what percentage of this pie chart in the model is production, it's going to affect how the player is ranked. And production models are going to like Vaughn a lot. He did have a lot of long runs, although he has build-up speed, and I don't think he's going to be getting to the third level as often as he did. He's just a good running back. I mean, in NFL terms, I think he's an average running back. I think he's probably right at the fringe between like startable and a committee back in NFL terms. There's nothing special about his game, but he can do everything pretty well. He's not the kind of running back that's going to run routes, but he can catch checkdowns. He's got good hands. He's a good pass blocker. But he's just screams the kind of running back that gets drafted on the situation and then is replaced in a year or two, or just never even lives up. Remember Bishop Shanky? Like just never actually even lives up to the initial expectations, because you still got to play. You still got to seize it. And we'll see. Now the ball's in Ronald Jones' court to come back, and he is basically the same age as Vaughn, and show that, hey, given some time, given some getting accustomed to the NFL, he's going to have something to offer that they have to say, we have to mix Jones in. If they mix Jones in, then I don't need that Vaughn ever takes off, except for the weeks that he scores a touchdown or two, and you play him as a matchup play. But I just feel like having the high ceiling wide receiver talent at the end of the first, second round, that's too much for me. And then let's put it in these terms. And let's put it in these terms for redraft, because I don't know what his redraft ADP is yet. I'm guessing it's going to be like 5th, 6th round, maybe as high as 4th. I hope not 3rd. Like, I think you're going crazy if you're taking him over.
That's crazy. Yeah.
That's like Melvin Gordon versus Keyshawn Vaughn or something like that. You're way out over your skis there. But what about like Keyshawn Vaughn versus David Johnson if we're just looking at a 1-year window?
Yeah, man.
Do you talk yourself into David Johnson this year? That's what I'm getting at. You're going to talk yourself into David Johnson
I don't know. There was like that one GIF that got like 5,000 retweets that I'll never get out of my head, where he just looked like Jason Witten getting a handoff. He
right.
Just so cooked.
Right. It's tough.
I mean, the opportunity should be there. I'd say pass on both. You brought up Melvin Gordon, who's actually a guy I'm heavily targeting just because of Pat Shurmur. We know the narrative there, unless Cecil has any words otherwise.
No, in fact, Cecil's cautioning people that Lindsey is just, I mean, as good as Lindsey has looked at times, you just have to look at the personnel management and what the team, like sometimes we keep trying to, and don't get me wrong, there are times, like Kenyon Drake is a good example. Like there are times that we watch the way players managed and we say the team is wrong, and we end up being right. At some point, there's a reveal, and we're like, aha, see, we were right. And then there are times that the team is managing a player, and of course, what did it take for Kenyon Drake? A change of teams. That might be what it takes for Philip Lindsay. It's just the team can't spell out with their personnel moves any clearer that they're not really seeing Lindsay as a foundational player in this offense, no matter what Lindsay does. And Gordon will be in, Denver offense should be fun as long as Drew Lock makes that step. That was wild watching what Denver did in the draft. It was, just kept going back to the bar. Pour another one. So that Keyshawn Vaughn one was good. What else? So we're talking about like early crushes, right? Early players that you're looking at. You're looking at ADP. Again, in the background, we're seeing what people think of them. Give me, it can be strong either way, negative or positive. Some players that are inspiring strong feelings.
Well, I know we're both really high on CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. Mm-hmm. And, while this is unideal, the landing spots were unideal. There's a lot of, really good receivers there. They weren't the first wide receivers drafted. It was Henry Ruggs. All right, whatever. Like Oakland just made an egregious mistake, and they're a poorly run franchise, and you can't convince me otherwise. Meanwhile, Jerry Jones, John Elway were beside themselves, just overjoyed that Oakland screwed up to the degree that they did. And then you want to talk about, immediate target volume. We already went into this, but at the same time, it's like you could have made the same case in Julio Jones's, rookie year, it's like, well, Roddy White's there, Tony Gonzalez is there, Harry Douglas is going to get 50 targets. Like, what is Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb going to do? They're still, top 5 prospects for me, and everything from the my post draft press review article series just like backs that up. I think Stephen Jones even said that let it slip and said he viewed Lamb as the number 2 immediately. So those are 2 guys I'm really excited about. Jalen Reagor I like a lot. Justin Jefferson less so. I think you're not high on Reagor, right?
No. Well, see, here's my thing with Reagor. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You watch his tape at TCU, and man, there are plays that are just wonderful. Like, he looks like Spider-Man going up for the ball if no one's around him.
Mm-hmm.
Like just if you could see like a ball that maybe one other receiver in the class could have gotten to, right? You see him sometimes turn a guy into stone with a double move. Sometimes his double moves are just unbelievable. And that's going to work in Philadelphia. You see him not quite to the level of Lamb, but you see him do some pretty special things after the catch. Obviously, you're going to set him up and do that. But I see so much inconsistency, right? So when I watch wide receivers leading up to the draft, I'm doing my very amateur evaluation, Scott. I almost want to get lulled into a hypnotic rhythm with their reps, right? Their route stems and things like that, their timing. And with Reagor, you never quite knew what you were going to get. And that scares me a little bit when it comes to translation in the NFL, because you can't do that in the NFL. Like, a wide receiver gets how many times to affect the outcome of a game? 6, 7, 8, maybe. Mm-hmm. And if 1 or 2 of those reps is a rep that causes an interception because you rounded your route, because you didn't like fire off the line of scrimmage, then that starts to lose. You start to lose trust, and no matter how much you can add. So, and I also see Reagor like with his contested catches. That is something where he doesn't shine. So I just feel like there's a bust risk there. But if he tightens those things up, rocket ship. So he's more of a boom bust of that tier, where like Pittman, I think, is a higher floor, maybe a little lower ceiling. Although Pittman's ceiling is higher than we think, as long as they can get the quarterback straightened out a year or 2 from now. So but that's my like amateur scout stuff. Y'all have a pro in Greg Cosell, and I know his stuff is out there. He's tweeted out a lot of his scouting reports, which are fantastic to read. He gets right to the point and shows his work. And I think that's something that's included in fantasy points. Let's talk about that for a second. Again, fantasy points. Scott Barrett, you know him, you love him. Graham Barfield, Greg Cosell, Adam Kaplan, I know, is part of the team. You all have a medical team. So I just want to give you a chance to talk about fantasy points, because it's exciting. I was excited when I heard you say, hey, by the way, if you're wondering what I'm up to, this is it.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I left PFF maybe 5 or so months ago, and we started this website, fantasypoints.com. You can get in, you can subscribe for free. Graham Barfield, who's been, one of my really good friends for a really long time, not just online, but in person too. We got John Hansen, the original fantasy guru, Joe Dolan, Tom Brawley, Greg Cosell, Adam Kaplan. We do IDP. We have 2 doctors on staff. I'm going to be handling DFS during the season for the most part, but also going to do a start sit article. And this off season, you can find, all the stuff I typically do. We're going to try and keep it without a paywall because of, uncertainty related to the coronavirus, and really just want everyone to come check it out and see all the really cool stuff we're doing. So, appreciate that. This is my baby. This is many years in the works, and we're excited to show it to you.
Okay, DFS. I don't know if you and I have talked. I thought it was DFB, not DFS. What's the DFB guide? What's some of the big things you put up on the wall, like the slogans in the DFB guide to DFS?
Oh man, I don't know. This thing's kind of like just it's really its own unique beast. Where with redraft, there's I could have these multiple slogans. We're DFS, like, thank God I love it. It's just this like all consuming passion where, during the season, I'll write this one article that, is sometimes 5,000 words. And it's really the culmination of literally 5 full long days of work. But I mean, we've had a lot of success. 2 years ago, 1 follower across like 6 different weeks, won over $100,000, wins of like 50, 20, whatever. But you got to get into DFS because it's just so.
Oh, I was until I moved to Louisiana, and I mean, of course, right. It was like the last thing that first we have to serve our customers, our audience, and deliver our content. And DFS is, I hate to say it, but it really does get into like the gambling ebb and flow, where there'll be times that you feel like you're not doing well over the course of a day, and you watch your tickets come in and you're actually doing really well. And because the public was on a totally different, you might have been like 70% optimal, but everybody else was like 40% optimal. And then there are times that you feel like you nailed everything, but everybody else also nailed everything, and almost none of your tickets come in. So it's definitely maddening because it's difficult sometimes to know how you're doing compared to your perception of how you're doing. But I mean, do you have like any specific metrics you've come up with, or any specific rules of thumb, or like things that are just your starting point when you're starting to put together your lineups for the week?
Yeah. So my go-to, I think this is legitimately one of the best stats ever made, and I know I invented it. So, nice. Maybe I'm a little biased, but it's expected fantasy points, and it just really basically just measures the volume a given player has received, and it assigns a fantasy point like to that. So yeah. So 20 red zone carries, 5 carries inside the 5-yard line, 50 targets with a total of 100 air yards. Put all that together, and what's it worth? It's worth 230 fantasy points. And how do you do that? I took 12 years of play-by-play data, looking at it by the specific down and distance, the specific distance to the end zone, the total air yards on each target, and also expected touchdowns. But basically every single week I would look at that, and I would look at the top buy low guys, the top sell high guys, contrast their expected fantasy points to their salary, and it's just like a great way to find price discrepancies for DFS.
So, and I like this, and we've talked about this before on the show. Mm-hmm. And I think, if I understand you correctly, it's this idea of a red zone touch, from this yard line is worth, on average, this many fantasy points. Mm-hmm. And this is where opportunity is king, or volume is king. And then you can start doing like concentric circles out from that, right? Well, if it's this player taking the touch, or if it's in this offense, or if it's against this team. And that's one of the things I want to ask you about DFS. In general, defenses don't matter, right? In general, how important to you, and you can always say, we can, it's what we do on the couch, right? We get out the fine-tooth comb, we split hairs, because it can be like, well, sometimes matchups are important, but here's some kinds of matchup things people pay attention to that I don't. How much are matchups part of your DFS approach?
I mean, it's a big part of it. So like, ask the DFS pros, guys who have actual skin in the game, who do this for like, this is what puts food on their table. They're all going to tell you the exact same thing, that matchups matter. I think the issue is, the problem, the matchups don't matter at all crowd is the same problem like a lot of us run into, is like the middle bulk of the sample in terms of efficiency, or like a lot of fantasy football metrics, like doesn't really matter at all. Like defense doesn't matter at all in the middle bulk of a sample, but the polar extremes are extremely important. Just look at, tight ends last year versus Arizona. Look at quarterbacks versus New England. Things like that really, really matters. And then you could dive in, deeper to it. It's like rushing quarterbacks against New England, because they played man defense so often. Your rushing quarterbacks are going to smash New England. Look at outside wide receivers versus Philly. So if you just look at total wide receivers versus Philly, they're bottom 7 but like they're the best defense against slot wide receivers, and they're the worst against outside wide receivers. And that's been true for 3 consecutive years. So they're, it's not as noisy as you think. You just need to know how to navigate it.
And finding those things. And I always think, Scott, the important thing is to have a hypothesis and some idea of a why. Because if it's just that the numbers line up, but there isn't some sort of why that makes sense, then chances are that's going to be proven to be counterfeit at some point. And then you just have to also pay attention to what's changing, like injured players returning to the offense or something like that. These are things that can change those things. But I'm just glad you didn't dismiss it and say matchups don't matter. And I think you're right to say that in the middle, matchups maybe shouldn't get you off of a player that you are really excited about how they're playing. They're in sync with their quarterback. The game plan is highlighting them, and now they're running into a tougher matchup. And matchups shouldn't get you on a player that you otherwise don't feel any sort of affinity for. But otherwise, matchups are important. So exciting.
But
go ahead.
Like you're always talking about, and this is such a good point, is that, you could look at the season and break it into 4s, and it just looks like radically different. Yeah. We could look across like the full spectrum and be like, oh, Arizona terrible against tight ends, whatever. But at the same time, like we were thinking that weeks, 3 through 8 about a different defense and a different position, but they make adjustments, and that kills us. It's why it's like, you can't just blindly follow defenses. Like you said, there has to be some sort of a priori, narrative building behind it. I was watching the press conference with John Elway, and he said a big reason why he wanted to draft wide receivers was because, he noticed at the tail end of last season, defenses were really selling out to stop Cortland Sutton. And of course, that's something that's going to happen. Like you ride that's why DFS is partly like so fun. You ride these waves of guys and then, get off of it when the narrative shifts or when the data shifts in a different direction. But it's all part of it, and that's a great point that you've always brought up, and I've always liked. Like the season can break it up into 4s, and it looks dramatically different.
Yeah, I wouldn't give credit to Matt Waldman on that too. Is that it takes like 4 weeks for them to catch up to things, and this year more than ever, that's going to be important. And I think we're going to see a lot of things that catch people off guard, like in October. The microbe gods be willing that. There's going to be dramatic shifts in offenses and defenses too, and then we're going to see some of the non-continuity catch up to the continuity. So this is an interesting time in our calendar, right? Like, okay, we've caught our breath, we've reacted to the draft. Normally we'd have like dribbles and drops of things coming in from OTAs. We're not going to have that this year. What are you going to be doing for the next couple of months as you're preparing for the 2020 season?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have like a bunch of series that I just write every year, so I'll probably get started on that. I actually just wrote what I think might be my best article ever. I feel like,
wow.
Yeah, I feel like I'm constantly, just trying to replicate what you do so often on your podcast. Like really respect you as a philosophical mind. What Adam Harstad has done in his articles, and Sean Siegel, started at RotoViz. And I feel like, I'm just like always trying to rip that off to some degree or emulate it. And I think I finally like hit a home run on one of those like deep philosophical dives.
Ooh, all right. Again, I mean, and I'm not trying to turn this into any kind of ad for fantasy points, but I'm excited. I would go get my account right now if I didn't have that. We're almost like the last 10 minutes. So we can kind of go off the rails a little bit here. I guess I'll start off this way, Scott. I'm gonna try to keep it positive because man, there's all kinds of ways that like we could get downtrodden. We may anyway. What's the first on your list when as we get closer to a new normal? We're not gonna go back to the old normal. We will get back to a normal as life eventually does reassert its equilibrium where we can start having communal public life again. What's the first thing on your list, man? What's the thing you miss the most from pre-corona life?
Yeah, maybe we are going to get a little depressing.
Oh, no!
My life is kind of, the same as it always been.
I know. Me too.
Workaholic who works from home. So a haircut. The only thing that's like really impacted my life is just they closed my pool and they closed my gym.
Mhm.
But outside of that, everything's pretty much the same. I'd like to. I'm supposed to go back to New Jersey, visit friends and family. But what about you?
Live music. I mean,
Okay.
they did the Jazz Fest in place. I gotta say, it's my show, so I can do this. I can say rest in peace to the Midnight Creeper. Man, New Orleans has lost a lot of pillars of the community. A lot of people that are like really, and New Orleans has such an incredible sense of community that people are really a part of each other's lives. And even me just listening to WWOZ and the Midnight Creeper on Thursday nights, he used to do the Midnight to 5 show. He actually did the Midnight to 5 show as Midnight Creeper, and then the next show was the gospel show, and he turned into Brother Jesse, and he went Brother Jess, and he didn't even tell anybody that he was the same person. People never.
Oh my God.
People never knew it. He was 72, I think. He passed coronavirus. Midnight Creeper was fantastic. Anyway, and it's just community live music. They just did the Jazz Fest in place, which was fun because they put together like the sets in order. They did a lot of local stuff. They did a lot of stuff from the 2006, the first one after Katrina, that had a lot of real poignant stuff. A lot of stuff where the music really meant more because, there's a song like Randy Newman's Louisiana 1927. They're trying to wash us away, and that's one of the things about being down here. I think New Orleans will be extremely resilient because New Orleans is already rebuilt from zero, from -0, below zero, because everything was flooded, everything was ruined, and it came all the way back. I think that these things will fire back up, but that live music, feeling all the air vibrating and being among people that are also under the influence, if you will, that's one of the things I miss. But I'm with you, Scott, actually, and I've made this joke a bunch of times that those of us in the fantasy football world, and I think a lot of internet content providers have already been living meaningful lives from their home and having their rituals and their things in their orbits, but not necessarily having to do with public life, and that this hasn't been as nearly as harsh of a transition as it has been for a lot of other people in the society. But we'll see. This still. I like you said. I can't help but to turn this into something a little bit more dark or shadowy. But there's a lot more change coming than I think the hive mind has absorbed. It's interesting watching it leach through the hive mind via social media, like the realization, the slowly. It's kind of like a tsunami. Like the water went out, and you can see it on the horizon. Like it's going to come back. We'll see what it brings. I'll take this into a total different direction, Scott, and again try to stay more positive. And yeah, Diego Lopez is rest in peace, Tony Allen. A lot of great. There's Richie Cole died over the weekend. I don't think it had anything to do with coronavirus. Another jazz great. Just appreciating. Look, I'll say this again. What this whole coronavirus thing about is like cherishing life, cherishing everybody's lives and the role we play in each other's lives, and having moments to do that. So I'll go this way, and then I'll tell you mine. But because our minds are sponges. We always want to be reading, watching. I know last time I talked to you, you said you were looking forward to reading books and things like that. Give me something, a book, a movie, a show. Give me something that has had your attention or interest lately when you're not being a workaholic.
Yeah, I just bought a book, The Tao of Capital by Mark Spitznagel. I'm maybe a quarter of the way through it, but really, really fond of that. I think it's a really good book. But TV.
So wait, the Tao of Capital, because those two things don't seem to go together to me. Tao and capital.
Yeah. I'm curious what you would think of it. But I don't know if I want to get there.
Okay.
I'll out myself as with something embarrassing. Is my girlfriend is the world's biggest Gilmore Girls fan.
Okay.
Which is really adorable, I think. And
sure.
I don't have a lot of time to watch TV. Just started this new website, NFL Draft, all that stuff. But we're now on the 7th season, and I don't hate it as much as I was, so sure I would hate it. Good. It's actually like a very, very adorable, wholesome, family friendly show, and just like the fact that this is her favorite show, where my favorite show is like The Sopranos or
Sure.
Deadwood or something with murder. It just like makes me even more fond of her.
It's love, you know. I mean,
Maybe,
if you really love each other, no, in any loving give and take relationship, like this is important to you. When what's great about what you said, Scott, is that it makes you love her even more, even if it's not something that you've incorporated in. Like you're all about the Gilmore Girls in that show and Rory and what boy she's dating or whatever. I'm familiar with it enough. I know that there was like it's like in like a Connecticut town, right? And it's anyway. And I think it's good as an aside. I think it's good for all of us males to get some things in our diet of movies, television, books that are from the female perspective. Like try to read some books by female authors. Try to watch some stories that are from the female point of view, because we're lulled into the male point of view as the default, because, well, that's, since we were kids, like what's been served up is changing little by little. So I commend you for that. But yeah, what's great about what you said is that even though you haven't become, thinking this is a great show, you still know what your shows are about. It makes you see things in the one that you love that make you love them even more. And hopefully that's honestly, I hope what's getting a lot of people through coronavirus times is love, right? I don't want to sound all like Pollyannish or like the Beatles, all you need is love. But the things that you love, and it doesn't have to necessarily be people, it's just what you love about being alive. Like what makes being alive for you a great thing. I'm back to building jigsaw puzzles. I love jigsaw puzzles. We've joked about this, and this is where everyone's going to be like, do it. I've joked about, and someone said that there are YouTube videos, like YouTube channels, where it's just like watching someone build a jigsaw puzzle. I'm like, oh, yeah. That's what I forget about fantasy football. I'm going to build jigsaw puzzles professionally. Can I do that? Because I can get immersed. The whole world just falls away if I'm building a jigsaw puzzle. And they're great, too, because if you get into like jigsaw puzzles that are art, you're seeing like all the individual brush strokes and things like that. So I hope that people are renewing.
What's the allure there?
Hmm?
What's the allure there with jigsaw puzzles? Does it like? Do you want to do like the biggest jigsaw puzzle, or?
Well, you don't want to go too far, because there are jigsaw puzzles that have like no picture on them, like the torturous ones that are just like pieces that are it's like all white or something, or all one color. So you're just strictly going on it. The allure for me is that when I'm it's just like when we're doing fantasy analysis or watching a football game or something. When I'm in the mode of looking at a picture, looking at the piece, like so I only like to do like 1,000 pieces or more. And some of it's the breaking the big task into the smaller tasks, and the smaller task into smaller tasks, and figuring out how you're going to attack this thing. But when I'm in the mode of the larger picture and then locating a piece in it, or trying to find all the pieces for one element, everything else in the world just falls away. It's like, again, like Zen or Tao or something like that, where so here's real quick, and I don't want to go over an hour. This is like one of my pet theories about life in general. I don't know if I've said this on the show before, but again, I was talking about this on Mitch Carl's great thing that he's doing, Rise and Fall, about that we all want to be absorbed into something. I'm going to go over an hour. Sorry, Cecil. The boundary between this and that, or me and you, is us and them. It's illusory. I mean, it's a way for us to. Our egos and our way of processing this thing works for us. It's like a way of processing this thing we're part of, but it really truly is one continuous whole. It really is one pulsating thing. We're one little extension of it, but we're all part of that same thing. And our egos, even though they empower us, torture us. Our egos cut us off from this, right? Our egos and getting absorbed in the I, and I know this well because I'm only speaking of my own flaws and foibles. It separates us off, and it makes everything about me and I, and it cuts off that flow. But what we all yearn for is getting back to that point where we dissolve back into something. It can be dissolving back into our loved ones, our girlfriend or wife, husband, children, our friends. It can be fishing, and just figuring out like where are the fish biting today and tying your own flies. It can be farming. I've done a little more gardening. It can be crocheting. It can be cooking. It can be watching your shows where you get absorbed in your shows, or reading a book. But those moments that you forget the ego and you're not you anymore, and you're you're somewhere in between you and other things watching football. These are the moments that we feel okay, like really okay, where we feel okay in a way that, again, from that Buddhist perspective, that it's not just like desire, chasing the desire fulfilled. Oh, no, I have to find something else to chase after. And you're constantly in this loop. So for me, jigsaw puzzles just get me right up to that point. And jigsaw puzzles are another thing that's been like, there's been a run on them. Like they're expensive or like you can't find them anywhere. Have you found this, Scott, that like you try to get like regular things from Amazon or what have you, and they're just not there, or they're like 3 times as much as they were last time you got them?
Not really. I was one of those people who like stocked up on everything way early. One of those jerks. But yeah, I like everything you're saying. You're reminding me of a book my friend who lives in an ashram with a guru gave to me. Who Am I by Ramana Maharshi. He described it as, this is my guru, whose guru was this guy, whose guru was this guy, whose guru was Ramana Maharshi, whose guru was the mountain.
Right.
Which sounds so badass. But yeah, it's all about, shed the ego, letting God in. I'm not that enlightened, but I mean, you're definitely echoing things he said to me.
Yeah, it's okay, because once you get enlightened, then you just go back to like, well, what do I want to do today? I don't know, cheeseburger. You know what I mean? At the end of enlightenment, everything, you're just back in life, and you have to figure out something to do with yourself today. The one thing I'll mention, since I went over an hour, that I've watched, was one of the best things on Amazon Prime. It's called First Footsteps, and it's about the Aborigines in Australia, and it was just incredible. Let me tell you a quick thing from it. This stuff's going to blow your mind, Scott. Boomerangs, right? You know about boomerangs. You've heard about boomerangs. I mean, boomerangs in and of themselves are pretty awesome. And they get into how, like, they're not really sure how Aborigines aerodynamically figured out how to throw a boomerang, like how to create something, because it has this like special curve and special shape. So they can throw them up to like 300 yards and have them come back to the exact place they're standing, which in and of itself is incredible to like create something like that, right? Like something you can throw and it comes back to you. That's wild.
Yeah.
But like, did you have any idea what boomerangs were used for? I mean, I just made an assumption and I was wrong, just so you know. Like when you think like boomerangs, what do they use boomerangs for? What would you think?
Is it a weapon?
Well, that's what, yeah. I mean, you think like, I would think like you'd like throw it at your opponent and whack them in the head, or throw it as like a bird and hit it out of the sky or something,
yeah.
Right. And it does have to do with birds, but it's actually that the profile of it looks like, I don't remember the bird that they're hunting, but it looks like a hawk above birds, like a flock of birds, and they all drive down, and the Aborigines would have like their nets set up. So one of them would throw the boomerang, and all the birds would see it and be like, "Oh man, there's a hawk!" Like dive down, and they dive down right into the nets. Isn't that awesome?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Like to invent something to mimic nature. And they also have been doing controlled burning of their landscape in a mosaic for thousands of years to create food supplies, because like certain animals would eat things certain animals were really into things when they would just start to grow back, and they would burn it in all these different intervals. So there were different food sources in different part of it. They were doing aquaculture. They were doing this stuff thousands and thousands of years ago. Like a lot of the first recorded ever is in Australia. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. The Australian Aboriginal culture goes back 40, 50,000 years, and they are true. Like did you watch The Mandalorian? This is the way. This is the way. They have like the law, and they've been living that way for tens of thousands of years, passing it down. And they talk about stories like with the Great Flood. There's a Great Flood in every story, and there was actually a Great Flood because Australia used to be Greater Australia, like New Guinea and everything was part of it. And then I think it was like starting 18,000 years ago to about 7,000 years ago, the waters kept rising and rising and rising, and it cut it off from New Guinea and the rest of the land. And they still tell those stories like it's like that happened to their grandparents. Like the oral tradition is so strong that the people today still have those stories. Of course, there's also the part of the story whenever the English show up. That's for another podcast with an entire other set of considerations. But lots of new considerations, folks. Fantasy points. Scott Barrett, DFB. Get your fantasy points account. We'll be coming back to these shores again many, many, many times. Everybody out there, much love. Thanks for giving people like me and Scott and all of the rest of us in our little world, dysfunctional world, something to do. And I hope we continue to give you something to do. May there be football. Stay safe. masks, hand washing. I see a lot of people going back out there like everything's okay. It's still the same danger that it was. So just take your precautions, look after one another. We're still here to look after you, and you help look after us always. So stay classy, and we love you.